Hello, everyone. I'll just give a few moments to have people cycle in here. Then we'll get started with today's webinar. For everyone joining us today, I just want to thank you and welcome you again. We're very glad to have you here for this session as part of Invasive Species Action Month. And just before we begin, I would like to take a moment for land acknowledgements. The Invasive Species Council of BC does operate across the province and gratefully acknowledges the territories of the Indigenous peoples of BC, where we live and work to maintain healthy ecosystems for all. We recognize that these lands are still home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and we express our gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded and continue to steward these lands since time immemorial. And on a personal note, I'm also very grateful to be joining you here today from the unceded traditional territory of the Ktunaxa people, where I'm connecting with my own passion for the land and for the opportunity to share that passion with others. I think helping people strengthen their connection with the land is one of the most meaningful parts of this work. I'm very thankful that we can come together in that spirit. So just a bit about Invasive Species Action Month, or ISAM. It's a provincial-wide campaign that happens every May. And this year, actually, the campaign has expanded nationally. ISAM raises awareness about invasive species and the simple, practical steps that we can all take to stop their spread. Since invasive species affect ecosystems, economies, cultural practices, and just everyday activities, but these small changes that we can make can have a big difference, such that like everyday decisions do matter. And that's really the message behind our 2025 theme, small actions, big impact. From rinsing off your kayak to planting native species in your yard, the small things you do help prevent the spread of invasive species. And then across BC, those simple actions add up to healthier ecosystems, stronger food systems, and communities better equipped to protect what they love. Now, each week during May, we're highlighting a different theme tied to those real life actions. And this week's focus is healthy gardens and green spaces. So, our gardens, yards, and community green spaces have the power to support native ecosystems or to spread invasive plants into those nearby natural areas. So, whether you grow food, flowers, or just simply enjoy a bit of greenery, your planting choices matter. Before we dive into today's presentation, just want to give a brief thank you to EnviroGreen, for supporting knowledge sharing during ISAM. We also want to recognize that these free webinars also are made possible thanks to support from donors, members, and partners. And we'll share a link in the chat where you can learn how to support our work. Quick note on today's format: if you're experiencing technical issues, please use the chat box, and Megan, who's running tech support, will do her best to assist you. And if you have a question during the presentation, type it in the Q&A box, and we'll take some time at the end of the presentation to answer those questions, as many as time permits. If we run out of time, we'll just share the questions and answers by email afterwards. And the webinar is being recorded, so it'll be available soon on our YouTube channel if you'd like to rewatch it or share it with your network. Now, for today's speaker, I'm excited to introduce them. Lauren is a medical herbalist with a deep-rooted connection to both nature and community. And at the Cowichan Farm and Food Hub, which is part of the Cowichan Green Community, she brings together her horticulture expertise and love of plants to support thriving biodiverse ecosystems. Please join me in welcoming Lauren.
All right, thank you, Craig. Super appreciate being here, and also just wanted to give an acknowledgement for where I am at today. I am in Duncan, which is the unceded traditional territory of the Cowichan First Nation and the Hokaminam speaking people. Like I said, super happy to be here and talk about plants, which is something I'm super passionate about. So yeah, I'm just going to screen share and we'll be good to go. And like Craig said, super happy to have questions at the end. And yeah, if anything else comes up, this is going to be just basic, going through some resources, why this topic is important, and then go through a few common invasives that are found in nurseries and garden centers and things like that, just to prepare you for the upcoming growing season and just bring awareness to that. Right. All right, I think that should be good. All right, so gardening for biodiversity, creating resilient ecosystems at home. Yeah, this is something that is important because it's something that you can do yourself if you have your own space or a green space that you steward. Even if you don't have your own space, totally fine. Like I grow all of my plants in pots, and there's still a lot of benefit to that, as it's, you know, encouraging pollinators and teaches you a lot about land connection and plants. And then if you ever are in a position to plant out in any sort of opportunity, then you kind of know and learn a lot through those processes. So yeah, if you are planning on planting things, it's super important to just be aware of what's out there. And then in this context, it's just avoiding planting invasive species and supporting the biodiversity and diverse ecosystems. So when you are out, sorry if it's a little bit noisy, but anyways, it's super important to support local for a few reasons. Um, especially if it's seeds, the seeds are then already ready to go for your region. So they're locally adapted to the weather, the soil types, the water levels there. So it's going to be easier to grow than, you know, planting from a bigger seed company that is, you know, maybe better suited for a different ecosystem, even if it's, you know, like partial shade seed growing in a partial shade spot. The germination might be a pretty low percentage. So it's good to support local. Also, just for the basic reasons of keeping local economy, and that goes for plants as well. They're already adapted to the region, so it's easier to transplant out, which is awesome. And it also helps with demand. Like if you are supporting local, it means that, you know, if everybody else is doing it too, the access might become easier, because right now it's kind of hard to find local seed producers, especially native plants locally can be a challenge, but if that's something that you're able to advocate for more, it makes it more accessible, which is great. Another thing that you can do is seed save. It's advisable to, if you're unable to find something locally, to go out and harvest seed in an ethical and sustainable way. I've had a couple people come to the nursery here, and they'll suggest that they're going to harvest like a sword fern from the wild and bring it to the yard, which in theory is a good idea, but best practice would be to find something that's already been cultivated locally, or actually that would be the only thing you could do for sword fern, but for something else you could save your own seed and grow that from home. Because the biggest thing here is, you know, to increase biodiversity instead of harvesting from the wild where it's already doing well. Even if something does seem abundant, it's there naturally, and we kind of want to keep the wild. So best practice is to seed save. The nice thing about doing that is you can learn the full process. The full process from seed to maturity of a plant. And then the thing that's interconnected there would be proper identification for any sort of harvesting, whether it is food, medicine, or seeds. Best practice would be to watch the ecosystem for a year. So you see the plant all throughout the year. You're able to confidently ID it when it's just, you know, leaves or flowers, seeds, all of that. Because proper identification is super important. And you also want to make sure that no other animals are fully dependent on that species, or maybe it's in a place that's undesirable due to location or pollution or overharvest or anything like that. So yeah, that's a good thing to do if you have access to that. Going back to identification, proper identification of species is super important. Even if you are just going to a nursery to buy plants, the horticulture industry loves to use different common names in plants. Sometimes they put the botanical Latin, sometimes not. And common names are common names for a reason. There's a lot of them that have the same name, which is super confusing. I'll talk about some of the species a bit later on, but some of them like English ivy. It's called a bunch of other things. So even if you're like, it's not English ivy, it's this. It's like it's still that thing. They're just calling it something different. So it's good to educate yourself on how to do that. I'll talk about resources in a minute also. Just anecdotally, I like 10 years ago when I was super passionate about this, but also didn't know enough. I didn't know how to properly identify the native trailing blackberry versus the invasive Armenian blackberry, and ended up pulling out a lot of trailing blackberry from a property when I was doing landscaping, which was super not cool and very sad. So hard way to learn. So big advocate on proper identification. I will never forget that. So I guess that's a good learning, but also kind of sad for that area. Proper identification, very, very important. And another big one for seeds especially is avoiding wildflower mixes, because wildflower does not mean native wildflowers. There tends to be a lot of species in there that grow really fast and don't have a lot of competition. So a lot of them are invasive, unfortunately. Even if you're well-intended and they're cheap and accessible, it's super not great. And a lot of the seed companies that sell them, unfortunately, the people that are ordering them don't get to select usually which seed packs they want. So they end up getting these kind of no matter what, which is super unfortunate. So just super important to educate yourself on those species. And if any plant or seed pack says things like spreads easily or fast growing or aggressively growing, super sketchy. Avoid doing that, because that usually means it's going to outcompete the native plants and is invasive. That's the few things I have for best practices. They kind of correlate to each other. And then, great resources. iNaturalist is great for learning identification. If you're not sure of something, just a great resource. Could talk about that for a long time, but it's kind of like Naturalist Pokemon Go. You can just keep learning forever, and that'll just stay with you. So that's super great. And then ISCBC, great resource. Like the search function's great. The Noxious Weed Green Book, great. The Grow Me Instead guide, which I have on the QR code there, if that's something that is of interest to you. It's something that we use here at the nursery. I've actually had a couple people show me that when they're buying plants, they are double checking to make sure that what they're growing is acceptable or a good replacement for what's already in their yard, which they're fighting to pull out. So that's a super great resource. And then any identification book that's appropriate for your region. The Pojar McKinnon ones are definitely like one of the top resources. And then something to look out for, which is a new thing just to AI, is not relying on AI books. That's totally something new. And then there are books out there that basically will be like, wildflower or medicinal plants of BC. They'll have a lot of invasives in there and don't necessarily label them as such. So making sure whatever you're using for an ID book is a reputable source. All right. So right now I'm working at the Cowichan Farm and Food Hub, which is operated by Cowichan Green Community. It's a food security nonprofit in Duncan. The nursery here has been open since 2020, and primarily is produce, medicinals, native plants, and some annual flowers. And the past 6 months has been actually pretty much cut out all sales of invasive species. They were previously grown to add like edible flowers and salad mixes and things like that, but that's completely gone now and phasing out completely. Yeah, there's just been more education to staff here, and yeah, this property's been worked on by the organization for about 10 years. And, you know, the people that have worked here have kind of seen the shifts. Like 5 years ago, somebody planted comfrey as a permaculture crop, and it's now taken over an entire wetland ecosystem, which I'll talk a little bit more about comfrey as well. But huge problem, something that we're now dealing with, which is super unfortunate. But yeah, everybody that we've told that, like, our reasoning for moving away from that, they're super encouraging and pretty happy about that. There is a really good selection of native plant species here also that the seeds were saved from continuously over the past 5 years. So there's a lot that are available right now. And then there's a back portion of the property where seeds were started in the fall and are slowly coming on now. So super exciting. It's a continuous thing. And yeah, always learning about which species people are interested in, because some of them are super hard to grow or maybe not super commonly used in landscaping. So there's a lot of opportunity to speak with the public about like why you'd want to grow these native plants, what benefits they have, teach them about pollinators and, you know, traditional uses of the plants, which is super awesome, and people are really receptive. So that's really awesome. And yeah, that's a little bit about the nursery that's here. Yeah, super exciting. All right, there's two plants here that I wanted to talk about. The first two, well, one on the left is comfrey, which I had mentioned. Is really commonly used in permaculture, usually as a plant that people chop and drop. So they cut all of the aerial parts down and they use it in their mulch, or they'll use it as I believe, a nitrogen fixer. But they are super robust. I think I spent 5 hours a couple weeks ago pulling out just one plant, making sure the roots were completely pulled out, because they're super aggressive, and even with a little bit of root, they'll keep growing. So not super fun. There is medicinal use, although I'd say avoid. And there's definitely other plants that you can use that do similar things. I mean, if people are wanting nitrogen fixing, really anything in the pea family is advisable. Like lupins are gorgeous. They're actually starting to bloom here on the coast, which is super exciting. And they're native, and pollinators also love them. So yeah, avoiding comfrey is ideal. Second one here is foxglove, which is also super abundant on Vancouver Island. Pollinators also love them. People like growing them in their garden, but they self-seed like mad, and it's a huge problem. So avoiding foxglove. There's a couple plants that look really similar, especially when they're at this stage. So it's one that's great to learn what it looks like, so you can pull it out, because right now it's a little bit easier than it will be in the fall. And then plants that are similar-ish, that are non-invasive, they're non-native, but still not going to be harmful for your garden, are plants like liatris, borage, sage, like I mentioned before, like lupins, things like that. Similar colors. Pollinators really love borage. Also an edible flower. And they do self-seed, so it doesn't have that perennial quality that comfrey might have, but edible, medicinal, pollinator friendly, super easy to grow, and not causing problems, which is great. So super brief overview. Yeah. Next, so many pinky purple plants here. On the left is butterfly bush, which grows pretty prolifically along the coast, especially near Metro Vancouver. There's a lot of it there. A lot of gardeners have become attached to it because it attracts butterflies. But they spread, they get huge, they're monsters to get out. But they are still sold in nurseries. So other things that you can plant instead, which are both native, shown here. In the middle is spirea, which are super gorgeous, look kind of similar. Pollinators like them. They're easy to grow because they are native. And then we also have the red flowering currant, which is native. They have a really nice, pleasant smell and also a pollinator. More commonly found on the coast, but those are really lovely alternatives to butterfly bush. Right. All right, the next one, which is one that was grown on the farm here, is bachelor's button. They self-seed like mad, and the seeds stay in the soil for several years. This is one species I thought that if I kept picking it, I was like, I'm confident. I know it's invasive, but I was like, I am good at gardening. I'm harvesting the flowers. I'm going to make sure it's pulled out of the ground and it's going to be fine. And I quickly learned that it was not fine. I found the plant growing back 3 years later, and it was a zone 3, so it was pretty cold climate. I thought the seeds would not live in the seed bank, and yeah, was very humbled. So yeah, like gardening has been a trial and error thing for me, but I am just like 100% advocate for not thinking I can outcompete a plant. So yeah, one to avoid for sure. It's grown in a lot of for edible flowers. And there's a lot of other things that you can use for, like pretty edible things instead, like violets or calendula, or, fireweed actually is great too. There's so many other things that are non-invasive or native that are also edible and quite pretty. Also roses, which just started blooming here a couple days ago, which is super exciting. Some alternatives to bachelor's button are like echinacea. It's non-native. It's a pretty robust perennial, and they're super beautiful. And you can get a lot of different ones that look quite different. And once they're established, they'll kind of stay in their spot too, which is a good sign. And then on the right is straw flower, which are it's like an everlasting flower. If you haven't seen them, they're used in a lot of wreaths over the fall and winter because they'll stay like this kind of indefinitely. It's an annual, so it's something you would have to plant every year, but they also self-seed in some climates, non-problematic, pretty easy to grow. Pollinators love them, so that's a huge plus. And they're quite beautiful in a bouquet. So yeah, that's what I have for bachelor's button alternatives. The next is English ivy. That's one that is called several things in nurseries, so, and is sold in a lot of big box stores. So just something to be aware of. And then also something to mention too is nurseries and garden centers tend to sell invasives because we keep buying them. So the more, awareness that we all have and are able to bring that awareness to our shopping habits, kind of decreases the overall demand. And then, just really encourage advocating in your own areas if you do see something. That's a really good way to bring that awareness in your own communities. I feel like there's something else I had to say there, but maybe not. But they tend to grow English ivy because it's another fast-growing spreader. But even if it is removed, even a small fragment will continue to grow. They grow actually even like I think a few inches throughout the winter too. So it's never actually dormant, which is why it's a huge problem, really hard to get rid of, and suffocates a lot of native species, and even things like trees too. They lose a lot of, oxygen and light, which slowly kills them, which is very sad. So some native alternatives are salal and honeysuckle. Honeysuckle has like the similar climbing habit that ivy would have. Um, their bloom time is quite short, but I would say in comparison, way prettier. And salal has that evergreen quality that ivy has, and also is a pollinator, and also has edible berries that are pretty incredible. So I'd say those are really good options. Um, and pretty easy to find salal too in nurseries. All right. The next one is periwinkle. There's two invasive periwinkle species. This one is planted in a lot of older gardens. I do see it commercially as well, just because this is like a ground cover that spreads and is deer resistant and stays green. So that is a huge reason why it's sold. That's very attractive to people when they're planting a garden. It's also cost effective. So other solutions would be, depending on where you're located, planting things like bunchberries, kinnikinnick or bearberry. Bearberry spreads, also evergreen, has medicinal berries, which is a fun fact, and they're eaten by a lot of animals, and pollinators enjoy them. So definitely, yeah, less showy, but when the berries are happening, they're quite beautiful, and have a really nice glossy leaf. And the bunch berries, personally, are way prettier than the periwinkle. They grow in a lot smaller clusters, but I mean, if you just planted a few different species, it'd be pretty amazing. And there's a lot of other options too. Instead of planting something like periwinkle, those are just two. There's so many others that would cover a space and look really nice. Yeah, that is all I have for that. So I'll just bring it back to Craig if there's any questions. I also put contact information if anything else comes up. I'm always happy talking about plants. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. I know that there was one question that came up for me. I know that early on you were talking about that difference between wildflowers and kind of that misconception that means kind of native flowers. Are there any other common misconceptions you can think of along those lines that people might not think of?
Sorry, common misconceptions about wildflower mixes?
Or just about invasive plants or native plants, one of those things like one of those, they think that, okay, this is a good thing. They're seeing wildflower mixes. And you just automatically think native wildflowers with that. Is there any other ones that kind of can get people tripped up a bit?
I think yes, sorry, just taking a minute to think. This is a few things. I think that, yeah, that's the first thing is people would assume wildflower is native plant. And also there's a lot of trust with how seed companies are named. Like if they're named with something that seems original, it might seem like, because this is, a local company, these are locally appropriate, when that's not the case. So just super encourage, like, just researching locally. And that's another reason to support like locally grown seed, because then they're not only easier to grow, they're not just like regionally adapted, but they're plants that are actually from this region. Because the local could actually mean a lot of different things too. So it's just knowing your labels. Like if you're looking for anything, like the common thing is like, green detergents or like green cleaning product. Green can mean a lot of things. Local can mean a lot of things. Like local could be BC, which is huge, a huge area. Local could mean like here, Vancouver Island, or like, just like the South Coast, where it's quite different. Like I had a conversation with somebody the other day about California poppy, which is regionally invasive, but not provincially invasive. So it really depends on where you're talking, and also like what people's understanding of what the word invasive means, especially when you're talking to people who are interested in like, gardening at home, backyard gardening or landscaping. Sorry, very rambly, but it really depends on like where you're located. It's like look out for that. And then like a lot of people will say that dandelion is invasive, which it's not. It's a non-native. It spreads, but it's not causing, a lot of environmental impact or economic impact or human impact. So it's not labeled as an invasive. So yeah, those are big conversations we have with people about wildflowers, because people don't consider that a wildflower. It's like it's there's a lot of perspective because people just don't want it in their yard. So being able to talk with people in a way that makes sense, that makes things seem kind of like attractive. Yeah, so just like as regional as you can get is ideal. There's a lot of species that will grow throughout the different ecosystems. But yeah, anything that says fast growing or like anything that is too easy. Native species are like they're good once they're established, but they are harder to grow. Like I did briefly mention, like all of the native seeds here were started in the fall and are like itty bitty tiny right now. So for convenience, it's a nice way of learning things, but buying the actual plants is probably best. So like economically, a seed mix is great, but the chance of it actually being non-invasives is pretty low. So I know that only partially answers
Yeah,
your
it sounds like
question,
with
but
a lot of it, it's kind of um, looking into things, kind of that researching that bit, checking with those seeds, not taking, just because it's a local company, it might not necessarily be local seeds, and kind of going for there, doing that homework. And I think a bit as well, you're saying about that terminology, whether that's the difference between a pest species or a weed species doesn't necessarily mean invasive, but also it might be a good one for that. And I think with along those lines too, I think we're seeing a lot of this with lawns and things like that in bigger gardens. Is there some good recommendations for maybe like container friendly or balcony options for someone in an apartment?
I think it depends on like what you'd be looking for. Like if you're looking for a pollinator versus like a flower or a food plant, like there's a lot of really good options. And something like I love the, like the pretty cultivated species. Something, locally here we've got Gary Oak ecosystems, which is an endangered ecosystem, and there's a lot of advocacy right now for them because of people are recreating in a really destructive way. I think there was like a Camas Day event last week, and there's like a movement towards using camas instead of tulips or something like that, because it's actually bringing that really special plant species, which is also keystone species, back. Even though like we love tulips and things like that, they're not causing harm, but using something that's native is actually bringing more back to the environment, not just to like the soils and the other plants around, but other pollinators and animals. And there's a traditional piece around that too. So like it's very important to support species like that. So I'd say like native first, it's great. The cultivated species, like we love them for a reason. They're super lovely. There's a lot of container friendly options. Like I grow everything on my deck. It's ridiculous. I've got probably 150 pots happening right now, which is kind of bonkers, but you just get a bigger pot if you have to. And it's the same thing. Like I think you can learn a lot from a plant species by just being around them. So like if you are wanting to learn ID, joining a BioBlitz on INAT and learning the species and then continuing to see, because you can learn a lot just from observation. I think that that's a super important piece there. Like if you're like, oh, like that plant's yarrow and it likes to grow in this way, they spread and they get really tall, but they grow more via rhizomes than like a taproot like lupin. Like I have lupin in big pots right now and I have to water them twice a day, because we're doing a lot of landscaping on the farm and I can't get them in the ground. They're really not happy because their roots are really like super thick and they need a lot of soil. So that's not a great container one, but something like yarrow is great. It's going to fill up your whole pot, super easy, beautiful, accessible, great option. Like there's native strawberries and different, all sorts of different food plants and things like that. A lot of people wouldn't want to grow something like salal in a pot, but I'd say again, it's just like researching what you'd be interested in. There's definitely accessible options and a lot you could do just in your back home balcony garden. So
it just sounds like, yeah, a lot of options. Depends how dedicated you are. You can kind of experiment a bit with that and kind of see what's in there. We're running out of time, so just a quick final question there. For anyone who's feeling inspired, is there an action that you'd recommend that like this week they can do to kind of help improve their green space or make it more biodiverse friendly?
it's a great question. Something that you could do this week. Just, I guess, more like a challenge is just like learn a new species. Like if you're not sure, especially if you are into gardening and you're weeding out things, it's like good to learn maybe what it is you're weeding out. Maybe it's not, the worst thing. Maybe it's something that you just move somewhere else, or yeah, and if it is invasive, making sure you're dealing with it in a good way, like garbage instead of compost. That's probably like the easiest thing to do, so you're not causing a further problem for yourself or for the ecosystem. But yeah, short and sweet.
Excellent. Well, Lauren, thank you. I think it's clear that our gardens can really be a powerful tool for supporting biodiversity, as well as preventing that spread of invasive species, removing them properly. And really appreciate the knowledge you brought today. I think it really shows that we can be thoughtful and helps inspire us to show how we can make a difference, even if it is right in our own backyards. And again, just want to thank everyone for joining us and being a part of Invasive Species Action Month. If you enjoyed today's session and want to help us provide more tools and resources, there's that link in the chat there. Even a gift of $5 can help us develop accessible programming that empowers people to help prevent that spread of invasive species. And I hope you'll be able to join us for future ISAM webinars. You are able to keep up to date on all things ISAM at bcinvasives.ca/ISAM 2025. Thank you and have a great day.